This week's show brought to you by Smeargle. Hope you caught yours in Pokemon Go. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. The All-Star break is over, and we're back to real basketball, some of which we can't talk about. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You know me as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, co-host, man of many hats, voice of God. Oh, my goodness, Brian, I'm messing up your nicknames. You only have two. Anyway, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
What's going on, Dre? I'm not talking too well tonight. Well, worse than usual anyway. I never really talk that well, but man, we're about to approach, maybe the craziest 2 or 3 weeks in American political history. We'll see. But at the same time, I think there's 11 NBA games tonight, so let's just keep watching the NBA. What else can we do?
All right, so here's going to be a rundown. We're going to stick more with the big three, is how I've kind of phrased it, where the normal format we kind of talk about last week on Lost. So these are comments you have left either on Twitter or on the comment section. Then some random topics around the NBA, and then the big topic. So the last couple of weeks we've had meaty enough topics. We've just devoted most of the show to that. And we're going to do that. And what I'll actually say, Brian, is for one of our comments, I'm going to throw something out to you, but we might not do it this show. We can do it on a future show. But what we're really going to do is have 3 meaty topics this week, those being the Houston Rockets. You know why, Brian. I'll let you announce it when we get there. Dean Oliver, Art Rondeau, and Sloan, which is coming up. And then, of course, the biggest rule. You called it the Zion rule. This was the most baffling, I don't know, Brian, maybe actually third most baffling sports story. We're going to talk that a little.
I am not baffled. We're going to talk about the Overton window a little bit.
Well, yeah, okay. I forgot. We talked when this happened. We talked that. So for those that don't know,
it's a political term, so we're using it in sports.
Yeah, and I'm going to have some stuff there. But is it Zion Williams or Williamson?
Williamson.
Yeah. So
Son of Williams.
Pointing out, Zion Williamson got injured in a game of college level hoops, and it's having all sorts of ramifications. So we'll get there. So on the last week on Lost, Brian, I actually realized I didn't prepare this. So let's push it off to a future show. I'm going to ask a question first. Have you actually seen video of the David Lee Wilson Chandler altercation that resulted in David Lee's arm injury?
I may have, but I don't remember it. So for our intents and purposes, no.
I had a commenter, and I forget the name, and as we know with my show notes, which have been spotty at best, I probably won't give credit, so apologies, commenter, but they noted that you could probably pin the blame on that more on David Lee than Wilson Chandler because he was like throwing an elbow. So what I was going to say is, I said at some point, I thought I'd do it this show, but we haven't prepared it. You and I could maybe even just Twitch it, maybe if not on the Boxscore Geek show, we could watch that clip together and actually assign blame, because I realized it's just become so ingrained in my brain that essentially David Lee's career was almost cut short thanks to Wilson Chandler, where I might be putting the blame wrong. Yes, he may have injured himself on Wilson Chandler's mouth, but who deserves the blame? So I was thinking at some point, and I haven't done this yet, I usually don't have it in me to watch horrific player injuries. I haven't seen the game footage live. It occurs to me. I've only seen I've seen the arm photos. I've read the news. I actually figure we watch it live at some point and ascertain who we should give.
I like this idea. I have a shoot user comment I can throw in there if you want, because I didn't think of anything before the show, but right now I thought of one.
What do we got?
The great Andrew Sutton, former co-host of this show, reached out to us by email this week. He emailed us a cringe NBA segment.
Oh, I have not gotten around to watching it. So yeah, explain what he sent, because I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I only got through like the first couple minutes of it, and I didn't have a lot of time either, but I just couldn't get it all the way through. It's kind of like so I think SAP did some sponsored content is what this is, and did it with the NBA, and they took 4, stat-friendly super fans or something like that, they called it, and they're trying to bring them in and do a reality show style thing to teach them to be NBA front office people. And they're getting Kevin McHale and a few other people to judge it because, of course, Kevin McHale knows about numbers. So, yeah, shout out to Andrew for sending us that link. I'll watch it at some point.
It's just cringe-worthy to watch. And I mean, what gets interesting, too, about the stat-friendly part, and even some of the people I'd consider more stat-friendly than not, these are like GMs that approach Sloan. in regards to actual advanced statistic in almost any other field, sports is so hilariously bad. And I'm sorry to say that, but it is just the case. And like I noted, Seth Byrne last week, we've quoted him, and I think I'm going to use that quote so many times. They're applying what they think they've learned. There are so many amateurist people doing this, or front offices that don't quite get it, but have heard, if you remember the show Mad Men, at one point in that show, I forget which guy, but he convinces them that they need a computer because the other ad agencies have computers, and it's in those day and age. That
was like the beginning of mainframes, right, back then.
But that's the point. They have to hire this big group of people to install an entire room for a computer, right? And it's probably not as powerful as a calculator you can get for free at a bank if banks still give out free calculators. But they get it, and they just go, well, we need this computer because other firms have a computer. They don't know why. And I feel that it bums me out because that in Michael Lewis's book Moneyball, he basically says that was a lot of analytics departments. It was some math-related guy that a team hired because they were supposed to hire them. And Moneyball was supposed to be the coming of the new era where that person actually became relevant. And, I feel in the NBA that's still the case. You have these people that are hired by a team because you're supposed to have an analytics person, and the team really still has no idea what they do or how to interpret it. And then the punchline to that too is that person might really have no idea what the fuck they're doing either. So it's all, blind leading the blind. Let's get on to the first topic, yeah. Brian. This made me ever so happy, and it's interesting. Arturo and myself have both had a night of a tweet the night before something happened and the night after being like, boom, you were right. I'm going to start with mine because I'm arrogant. And actually, I was just how the show notes were laid out. But basically, what happened is Kenneth Faried was acquired. You have praised him hugely, and I think I'm a huge fan of Kenneth Faried because
I feel like we've been talking all year, Dre, that the Nets were wrong for burying him, that someone should have traded for him. Like, we've been on this for a while.
Well, it's funny. It was the very classic. We were like, holy cow, the Nets made an amazing move acquiring this guy. And then, of course, correctly, we were trepidatious if he'd get played, but also optimistic. We're like, why would you pay a guy $13 million not to play him? Good question. As of last week's show, he had played more minutes for the Rockets than for the Nets, despite the fact that the Nets played him
400 already for the Rockets.
Yeah, and the Nets had paid him 8 times as much as the Rockets, I believe. So the Rockets acquired him because Clint Capella was injured, and he was actually getting started essentially as a center, filling in for Capella, and we were like, and he played amazing. We were like, holy cow, this guy is amazing. This is such good. And what we said is when Capella comes back, they should just play him next to Faried. And then, of course, what happens? Capella comes back. They relegate Kenneth Faried to the bench. In 17 minutes, he plays very well. I think he was 5 for 6 from the field. 8 rebounds is his classic Faried, but he only gets like 17 minutes of play. And what I tweeted out is I said, any team that plays Austin Rivers more minutes than Kenneth Faried, deserves to lose to the Lakers, because that is what happened. The Houston Rockets lost to the Los Angeles Lakers, who, are on a free fall right now. Lots of stuff there. More people are right things, Brian. As I said, I was right about Faried, and I'm going to give you this. If you look at the Lakers, it is Team LeBron. This is LeBron James, JaVale McGee, Lance Stevenson, Rajon Rondo, and then Tyson Chandler. These veterans that LeBron James kind of forced onto the team, GM LeBron, they are not the reason the Lakers are struggling this season. The reason the Lakers are struggling is the young, impressive, up-and-coming core of essentially Kyle Kuzma and Brandon Ingram. The young players that everybody wanted with the draft picks are the ones that are not living up to potential. So I do find that amusing, where people might be saying, this team should be doing better. We were such a young, promising core, and LeBron is screwing up their chemistry. And the reality is these young players who weren't that good before LeBron showed up. Kyle Kuzma had like a good starting week and then turned into a mediocre rookie. And I'm saying mediocre rookie as in mediocre for a rookie. So not a mediocre NBA player. Mediocre NBA player for a rookie can be good.
Kuzma is fine for his age. He just shouldn't be getting heavy minutes yet.
Yeah, and so I want to point out to the Lakers fans, LeBron and Team LeBron are doing fine. Now, the Lakers might have made some, with letting Larry Nance go, with letting Zubats go, making some questionable moves, and I don't know how most those interact with LeBron, is what it is. But just saying we're right, I'm giving you that credit for the Lakers. So the Rockets, arguably a team with an MVP caliber player that should be making a push, lose to the Lakers. The very next day, or the next game rather, they start Kenneth Faried in place of an injured James Harden, essentially at the small forward position. So that they have a front court of PJ Tucker, Kenneth Faried, Clint Capella, and they take down your Warriors, Brian. And Kenneth Faried improves his career three-point shooting total by 11% in that game. He took 4 threes in that game. So we are
45% with the Rockets.
God, we are in love with this idea right now of Kenneth Faried being a starter for the Rockets, being a starter next to Capella, and shooting threes. We're one of the biggest fans of Faried, and so we could not be happier about this happening.
Yeah, and I was telling you before the show, Dre, like, how long do we want to beat this dead horse of how good Kenneth Faried is and why the league is so forever? Why? So here's my point on this. Every other team in the league that's trying to go to the playoffs this year and compete just screwed up by not trading for Kenneth Faried. The Brooklyn Nets, who had him, are one of those teams. They should have just played him. Someone should have traded for him and paid him the $13 million this year, or the rest of the year, half of that or third of that, whatever it is.
We were talking this pre-show, Brian, and I do feel it's important. We've kind of hashed this point out a few times on the show as the years progressed, is it's very misleading to view a player as $13 million. And I realize we do that, right? Well, as I've said, one of the most popular pieces we've done over the years, and we've like outsourced at Forbes and whatever, has been the overpaid, where we do some math like Dirk Nowitzki is getting paid $20 million this season. He's only produced 2 wins. You divide that out, and that means he's way overpaid. You're overpaying him by $15 million. He's the 3rd most overpaid player in the league. Kobe Bryant at the end of his career is the king of this. But the way the NBA works is you have a salary cap and you have to spend 80% of it. And you're allowed to trade players. So whenever there is a player, when you're saying we can't spend $13 million on Faried, that's too much. The reality is you probably have a player on your roster that you're paying $5+ million to that is at bare minimum worse than Faried, if not a bad player you should be getting rid of. I mean, I think barring the Warriors, I think every team in the NBA has at least like one bad, really overpriced player, as in they are both below average and paid too much, that you could probably get rid of. And teams overvalue draft picks, especially for a team that's going to be in the lottery. So if you're the Nets, you can say, we'll give you our lottery unprotected pick, or another team could say it to the Nets. Sorry, I'm getting things confused. But yeah, if you're a team not in the lottery like the Knicks, you could go up and say, we'll give you our draft pick and this bad player for Faried. And teams overvalue draft picks. So I mean, this is just a really common thing that can happen. You can churn because it's not as cut and dried as I guaranteed Kenneth Faried $80 million of contract, and that's set in stone and I'm done. It's completely sunk. It can be, I guaranteed this player $80 million. I'm allowed to trade away $40 million of it. And there are other assets I can acquire. I can Sam Hinkie it up and just acquire every single draft pick and do exactly what the Colangelos did. They traded away all those draft picks to basically do what we're saying. So it's when you're saying a team could have bit the bullet and paid $13 million for Faried, I'm saying a smart front office could maybe have offloaded an $8 million contract, and essentially that means you're picking up Faried for $5 million.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Because what I'm describing is the very worst case scenario, right? Which is you get, an all-star level player for next to nothing, and like you said, you could, do even better than that. So yeah, I mean, we've been calling this for a long time, and so we're happy to pat ourselves on the back for it now.
Can I use your next bullet point as a subtweet?
Okay, I got a few more things on Faried, but go ahead.
Okay, they're related. Okay. Because what you said is, you said Mike D'Antoni on the decision to start Kenneth Faried. Our biggest problem is defense because we're not rebounding the basketball. And
let's show these D'Antoni quotes.
We've said this before, where even if you look at the Dean Oliver 4 factors, right? One of the defensive 4 factors is rebounding rate. And we've gone with the classic in Mighty Ducks 3. The coach tries to train the team to be better at defense and basically says, you can't allow garbage put back shots. So on defense, it is really critical that you don't ever allow the defense to, maintain an extra possession of the puck. And that's the same in basketball. If Kobe Bryant's a sucky shooter at 45% from the field, but he gets 2 or 3 attempts, which is what was happening when he had Pau Gasol and Lamar Odom, it's much, the worst shooter in the NBA, if you give him 3 attempts, is basically better than James Harden if we're talking about that efficiency level. So rebounding is key, and you're saying D'Antoni's noticing this. We need to rebound the ball better. In fact, I'm very curious. So I'm going to try and go to Basketball Reference and look that up. But then what I noticed, the subtweet I'm giving is at Crashing the Glass, the Ben Falk site that I have a membership to, but I really don't take advantage of. I need to do something about that or cancel my membership. He released an article about how it's amazing that despite the fact that the Milwaukee Bucks are giving up a bunch of 3-point shot attempts, that they have the best defense in the NBA. And if you look at it, it's very simple. They don't allow shots in the paint, and they don't allow opponent offensive rebounds. So they are amazing at defensive rebound, and they are amazing at keeping people out of the paint. And this is classic big person stuff. There was a Tom Haberstroh article earlier this year where Greg Popovich was complaining about 3-point shooting. And first off, this is the wrong way to do analysis. As we mentioned, it's junk analysis. You should really do regression analysis, which means instead of looking at one thing, instead of looking at how often does offensive rebounding correlate with win-loss, how often does 3-point shooting percent correlate with win-loss, you really need to say controlling for 3-point shooting efficiency, controlling for 2-point shooting efficiency, controlling for turnovers, controlling for this. How important is a rebound? Which, the wins produced formula does, and basically says a rebound is equivalent to a made 2-point shot. But what he said is the most important individual stat for winning in basketball tends to be rebounds. You win the rebound battle, you tend to win the game. And so what is getting amusing to me about these takes, the Crashing the Glass, the Tom Haberstroh article, this Mike D'Antoni point is, for years we have known that bigs are important and getting rebounds and controlling the paint is important. And I'm just amazed how even advanced analytics sites like Crashing the Glass can be baffled. They're like, why is this team, the Milwaukee Bucks, with the greatest, most versatile big in the NBA and Giannis Antetokounmpo, the de facto MVP? It's going to take a lot for him to lose that MVP award. Why are they so good? And you're like, well, this team that's amazing at rebounding and has some amazing bigs is winning at defense because that's the way it's always been in the NBA. Are you really shocked?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of our biggest things this year and in years past, right, is pushing back against, for lack of a better term, the fetishization of small ball and 3-point shooting to just the utmost degree. And we've been pointing out, this year, look at who the best teams are. It's the Bucks, the Nuggets, teams that are big and play big players at all positions and just dominate on rebounding and defense. And of course, 3-point shooting is great. And, who takes the most threes and from the best places? The Rockets, right? They're the team that exhibits that small ball, bias almost to the utmost extreme.
They're good with Clint Capella. And I mean, that's.
Well, yeah. And that's what I'm saying is this illustrates what we're saying perfectly, that even this team, even Mike D'Antoni, Mr. 7 seconds or less, says, well, we're not rebounding, so we got to play Kenneth Faried a lot. Even Mike D'Antoni will say that and do that, but somehow the mainstream NBA media and fans will not. And so this whole situation just points out the absurdity of it to me. And what I tweeted out was I didn't watch this game live. I didn't get to watch it until the next day. I was doing something else. And it got spoiled to me. I knew the Rockets beat the Warriors at home without James Harden because that was the narrative, right? Everyone's saying, oh, Rockets went on the road without James Harden against the Warriors. That's a great win. That was not the story of the game at all. The story of the game was what you were saying earlier. They started Capella, Faried, and PJ Tucker, easily their best 3 front court players. It's not even close. We know it's Chris Paul and James Harden in the backcourt. And that's what I was tweeting out today was these reports by Salman Ali, who's a local ESPN reporter down there in Texas. He revealed that's the starting lineup. Those 5 are starting for the first time tonight. They're going against the Hawks. We'll have to see how that game's going. It's probably over by now. But I think this 5 is terrifying. And if this is their finishing 5 in the playoffs, that's as good as anyone else. That's as good as anyone the Bucks can put out there. That's as good as anyone the Warriors or Nuggets can put out there. Unless they are, too much on the road in the playoffs or something like that, I think the Rockets are a huge favorite if these 5 stay healthy. Not a huge favorite, sorry, a huge contender is what I meant to say.
I would say, yeah, they're up there. Where I mean, what we've said this a lot about the playoffs in general is it's always rough in the playoffs because by the time reversion to the mean happens, is what I always say. By the time reversion to the mean happens, the series is over. So you lose one or two games, even if you were a 50-50, you're a 50-50 chance with another team. You lose two games and you're just expected to lose even if you were the favorites beforehand. So,
and can I get the second D'Antoni quote in here too? This is also from at Salman Ali NBA. D'Antoni on Houston's floor spacing with Faried in the lineup, because that's the pushback, right? If you're playing this defensive lineup that rebounds, you can't space the floor at all. D'Antoni says, will that hurt our offense? We'll see. It's not like we're great shooters anyway, so maybe it won't hurt our offense. And I think he's revealing something there. He's not being sarcastic. I think what he's saying is our offense is good just because we jack up so many threes that are good shots. Like, we take good shots. Maybe we don't make them. Maybe we're not good shooters, but we play smart.
Well, I can't believe I shut that window. I was trying to see your point. The Rockets aren't actually doing as well as I would think against the Hawks tonight. But
okay. But who cares what happens tonight? I think this 5 is really good for the Rockets.
I mean, the Rockets are that's another interesting point to what you're saying. So the Rockets are 24th in defensive rating in the NBA right now. And they're second in offensive rating. And D'Antoni is not wrong. If you look at their offensive and defensive 4 factors, they are dead last in defensive rebounds in the NBA. So this is what we always kind of talk about, the Brian bins of productivity and the magnitude of things. It's like, you afford to give up a little on offense. And for what it's worth, I don't think anybody, I don't think who is he replacing? So it's PJ Tucker, Capella.
Basically Eric Gordon.
If he were to come in for Eric Gordon, who is not good at offense, is that really going to hurt your offense enough that, even if Eric Gordon...
He's at 63% true shooting, Dre. He just doesn't shoot... He does shoot threes now, but we don't think that'll stand up is all.
Yeah, so the funny point is, if you were arguing Eric Gordon's floor spacing, which bullshit I don't buy, was
32%
helping...
32% on threes? No way.
Yeah, but even if you were going to try and say that, I don't buy that the trade-off between the hit to the offense, where they're already second, isn't going to be made up for easily where they're dead last.
And that's the key point. And that D'Antoni identified that you need to go for the value and not the long tail. That is something everyone misses, and that's why he's one of the smartest coaches.
All right, so anything else to say on the Rockets before we go on to Zion Williamson?
Oh, man. I'll take one quick look at the script here, but I think we covered it all. Again, we'll be beating this horse for a long time.
All right.
Yeah, let's go to Zion.
This, again, pointing out prognostication power. The day before, so it was, if I'm getting this right, it's UNC versus Duke, were two of the big powerhouses in college hoops, obviously.
I think Duke was number 1 at the time, and UNC was 8th.
Yeah, whatever. But I'm just saying, even perennially, right?
Shout out to Jonathan Weiler.
These are, because he's
a professor there at UNC. Yeah.
Did UNC manage to pull it out after Zion's injury?
UNC destroyed Duke in that game.
Okay, I'm hoping so. I mean, that would have been utterly embarrassing if 53 seconds into the game, Zion goes down and you don't even win. Okay, so 53 seconds or somewhere around there. I'm sorry if I'm getting the timing incorrect. Zion Williamson basically slipped because his shoe exploded. Is how I'm hearing it phrased. This has got to become an amazing image that's just going to persist in sports media, Brian. I could be wrong. I'm going to do a Madman call out again. There's a Madman episode where he has like an image of a suitcase standing like Muhammad Ali. And Peggy's like, no one's going to know what this means. And he's like, are you kidding? That image is going to resonate forever. I'm going to be like Don Draper and say the image of President Obama, still my president, Brian, of President Obama pointing and saying the shoe broke.
You can read his lips in the image. Yeah.
That's what happened. Zion Williamson.
Obama was sitting courtside for the game and saw the shoe broke.
And Obama points, and if you found it as we're talking, Brian, I'd love if that's up. But yeah, Obama's pointing, says the shoe broke. Zion Williamson goes down. And this image, Obama pointing, Zion Williamson going down, could be the death of the NCAA, Brian. Maybe in years to come, that's what this will point at this moment, this crystallizing moment. The night before this happened, Arturo tweeted out, he said, every minute Zion Williamson plays, every additional minute Zion Williamson plays college hoops, he is risking millions of dollars. And this happened the next day, which is freaking remarkable. And I mean, that is almost the point. Another classic player we like, Ben Simmons, who was our number 1 draft pick, and I believe was number 1 on the board. I think Ben Simmons.
Yes.
There are some players where you look, and I think I was trying to look at some other number 1s, and basically, if you look at their recruitment rate, right, they were top 20 going into college, and this isn't surprising. Dave Barry's research has basically said if you do amazing in the NCAA Final Four tournament, you can really boost your ratings. Winning the Final Four, winning the March Madness NCAA bracket is worth 12 draft picks, all else being equal. You're saying you should be doing instead of just going one stat versus win, saying all else being equal. If you have really great stats and you win the NCAA Final Four, you're gonna jump 12 lottery places. Now, of course, the reason sometimes this might not matter, and this is like the Ben Simmons case, if you're already number 1 and your stats are already good enough for number 1, there's nothing you can do in the Final Four that's worth it. And that's essentially where Zion is at. So he was the number 1 recruited rank coming out of high school. He's been the number 1 recruited rank, and the eye test. I've seen so many memes, GIFs, whatever of him over the course of the year.
His numbers are crazy in college. The question is kind of how big of a hype prospect should he be?
And I'll give this out, by the way, some more shout, as if you don't follow American Numbers on Twitter, again, how are you here? But Arturo Galletti on Twitter, American Numbers, he said the great thing about Zion Williamson is that if you've got a stat model that you're doing college projections for, if it doesn't say Zion Williamson is the obvious number 1 pick, go back to the drawing board. And geez, okay, so let's read this off, Brian, per 40 minutes, because that's a full game. So good job. College Reference copies us on college, but not on NBA. So they do per 40. Like that's Dave Barry normally does this. He does the per regulation game limit. And so per a full college game, Zion Williamson is averaging 30.7 points, 12.5 rebounds, 3.1 assists, 3.1 steals, 2.6 blocks. Only thing I'd like to see him get under control, Brian, as we've said, is turnovers, 3.3. He's not really good from beyond the arc, but I'm okay with that. You're right. Remarkable numbers. And let's see. He is 6'7", 285 pounds. That ain't right. So
yeah. So before I said he's built like a defensive lineman, like J.J. Watt, maybe, but that's not quite right. I looked further, and who's a defensive lineman with the exact height and weight of 6'7", 285? Julius Peppers, who's retiring this year, maybe one of the best of all time. He is Julius Peppers, Dre.
Julius Peppers, that is remarkable.
No NBA player has ever been Zion's size.
So, but giving back to Arturo just 100% right. There's no incentive for him to play beyond pride, and it gets weird on the show, Brian, because I know we end up on the cold, calculating economist side. You called us that, and we're very matter of fact, and we say screw the fans, screw the sport, screw this. Just it's funny. And I understand that there's a weird dilemma there, which is if you are in love enough with basketball to become an athlete of this caliber, there is going to be some irrationality to your love of the game. So I understand when you try and tell people a title doesn't matter, your money matters. Playing in the city doesn't matter, the money matters, or whatever, right? Or if you want to win, not ending up on SportsCenter. You don't want to worry about getting on SportsCenter. You want to worry about ending up on the top 10 box scores of the week. I understand that a lot of that's just going to, sound absurd to a lot of people, but with Zion, it's true, right? He has nothing left to prove in college. If he sits down and passes a physical, he's going to go number 1 in the NBA draft. And so this thing happening is remarkable. And I love that you passed this along to me, Brian, because what you said happened after this injury happened. So he possibly injured both knees, took a fall because his shoe exploded, which is bad news for Nike. And then as I mentioned,
seconds into the game, right at the beginning.
Seconds into the game, you talked about this concept called the Overton window.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason you brought this up is if you went to Twitter, I don't think I saw a single person that took the side of don't pay the college athletes. In fact, so many of them were saying he's not getting paid. This is bullshit. He's not getting paid. This is bullshit.
Current pros who have to worry about their media image.
And I think a big part of it that's interesting that makes this even bigger is because he's at a big school that has a big contract with Nike and the shoe faulted out. It's going, this school is getting paid millions of dollars for him to be in that shoe, and he's not seeing a dime of it, and that shoe almost cost him his career. So it is fascinating that the way you phrased it, and I know you've got the Wikipedia article up, is so the Overton window is kind of like, I'll actually let you describe it because you actually know it better than me, and you sent along, and I'm the one who brought this up.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing to how ridiculous this situation was, how it's such a perfect storm, because that was what everyone was talking about, right? The ticket prices for this game were like Super Bowl levels. They were like $4,000 for courtside seats.
To be fair, that was the resale market, and that gets into a weird territory.
That's fair. That's important.
One thing I'm surprised about with resale value and all that, that we've already started seeing in, as an example, video games, is it is remarkably easy to have a digital footprint when you purchase something. In fact, a few times I've gone out of town, I've gone to see the Celtics play in the Garden. I've gone to see the Warriors play in Oracle. You order the ticket online, and the second I've done that, I've gotten put on mailing lists where like the Warriors like, hey, you want to buy season tickets or group package? I'm like, I'm not going to really get much use out of that. It would be remarkably easy to say, when you buy a ticket, you tie it to yourself, and you can't, you say it's for you. And actually, what's interesting, Pokemon Go for GoFest this last year kind of tried to do something like that, where if you were going to buy it, it had to be for your username. It couldn't just be for any old person. They failed spectacularly at it, but I'd hope the NBA has a better ticketing system than Pokemon Go. And you could get to the point where you could say, look, if you're going to buy this ticket, it's for you. And if it's not for you, you get to give, you can maybe sell it back to the school and the school can redistribute it. We could do that. There is an interesting point that is not in the list of incentives for either the NBA or the NCAA at this point. That's very telling.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And I throw it in there mainly just to, just because Zion's not getting any of that $4,000.
Huge point is, if you go to school at UNC or Duke, this was in the book, one of the irrational books by Dan Ariely. So Dan Ariely has written a collection of books, Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality. They're about behavioral psychology and basically common human foibles and why humans don't behave like the classic economist would expect. And one of my favorite examples he uses is Duke, because if you go to Duke tickets are huge to go see Coach K and the next crop of 3 of the top 20 NBA draft players play. Those tickets are huge, and they actually have a lottery system where, so this gets really weird. You have to camp out to get on the lottery, as I understand it. So this may have changed in recent years.
I read the students camped out a week for this game. Some did.
So you camp out to be on the lottery system, and then as soon as you are on the lottery system, you might get the ticket. And the reason this gets huge that Dan Ariely brought up is he said this provided an amazing experiment, because what you do is you go through those people in the tents camped out and you get their names on an email list. And then you find out who got tickets and who didn't. And you try and do what we're talking about, this resale market. And you call the people that got Duke tickets and you call the people that didn't. And you ask the people that got Duke tickets, how much would you be willing to give up a ticket for? Like $4,000. And you call the people that wanted tickets but didn't get them, and you say, how much would you be willing to pay? And one of the things the studies proved is that we overvalue things once we have them, right? As soon as I've got that Duke ticket, I'm going to value it more than someone who doesn't, which is just classic humans irrationally overvaluing lotteries they win. Might apply to NBA teams that win draft lotteries. But yeah, so these tickets are massively expensive. If I'm a student at Duke, I could make, if I was lucky and persistent, I could make thousands upon thousands of dollars selling Zion Williamson tickets.
As long as I'm camping out by ticket offices. If
you camp out, get lucky. I mean, I'm sure you could moneyball this, right, Brian? If you got enough people or something, right? Come up with some. In fact, I would not be shocked if in a couple of years something like that comes out, where like smart group of Duke students, were remember the Monopoly game at McDonald's? How it turned out it was for years. We find out that a group of students have been gaming the Duke season ticket basketball games for years. But yeah. If you're a student at Duke, you can make thousands of dollars selling tickets to watch Zion play. Zion can't make any money. Zion's playing in Nike shoes. He can't make any money. His coach is making millions of dollars. Boosters are giving lots of money to the school. Zion's getting nothing. And we just saw potentially him end his NBA career. Now, obviously, it looks like everything's okay, and that probably won't happen.
Yeah.
It would be another Greg Oden, though, so who knows? And everybody seemed to be on his side. And what you're talking about with the Overton window seems to be how comfortable people are, because as recently as 20 years ago, we were talking about Blue Chips. The movie Blue Chips on last week's show came out in, I think, 1995.
That sounds right.
Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal as college students, and they were close to that age. I think Shaq was 2 or 3 years in the NBA at that point, and Hardaway actually was a college student. And in that one, it was talking about this nefarious, essentially it was Duke, right? This college with an amazing coach that couldn't compete anymore because too many schools were paying money for athletes to pay. And so these boosters behind the scene were recruiting the best players, Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway. That would be an amazing college squad to play and win for him. And in the end, he retires in disgrace because he can't deal with this unfair system of paying college athletes. Think of how nuts that is. I'm describing a movie where the villain was paying millions of dollars or thousands of dollars to college athletes to play basketball, where we are at now, where Zion Williamson gets injured and everybody's like, just give him the damn money and let him play.
Yeah, and the blue chip school that they played for, that Nick Nolte coached, I want to say it was called Western, so it's basically like UCLA, right? And as we talked about before on this show, UCLA was thought to have paid players back in the Wooden era as well. Or at least that's what, I've heard anyway. So what's the Overton window? And it is a political term, not an NBA term. It's not about the great Doug Overton, who played for the Washington Bullets and other teams. It's actually named after political science Joseph P. Overton. I'll just read the first line of the definition. The Overton window is the range of ideas tolerated in public discourse, also known as the window of discourse. And there's a nice graphic here that applies to American politics anyway, where you can see at the top there, it's the more freedom idea. This is the liberal side. At the bottom, the less freedom, the authoritarian side. And then this window in the middle, where that's kind of the accepted discourse within a specific topic. So that's a little abstract. So what do I mean Overton window specifically for this Zion Williamson situation? Well, yeah, like you said, Dre, back 20 years ago in the 90s, back when I was listening to talk radio and we didn't really have much of an internet or anything like that, I think it would have been a much different reaction. People, wouldn't have been calling for the abolition of the NCAA. They would have just been saying tough injury. But when this Zion injury happened, like I was saying a little earlier, current players who have to worry about their reputation with NBA owners were complaining about it. All kinds of people in the media. And even if you go to the far, far right wing, like most ridiculous tools in the media, and I'm thinking like, I don't know, the Fox guys, what's it, Skip Bayless, Chris Broussard, Jason Whitlock, those types, like that's where I go, let's see what they're saying. Even they were kind of like, this is bad. I don't know. And I consider that to be like the farthest right wing side of the Overton window here. So
it's interesting to call that right wing, but yeah, it applies. I'll give it to you.
Yeah. Well, that's what it is, right? Like in America, the political right is all for, this continued NCAA indentured servitude, and the left. And now everyone apparently is mostly saying, let's get rid of this shit and actually have real competition and real capitalism, right? So anyway, I was surprised by how swift the reaction was, and also not just the reaction, but the action by the league. The NBA said, yep, we're going back to 18-year-olds again. It happened within 3 days or something like that.
What's amazing about that, so this is where it gets funny. So obviously it's Michelle Roberts, right? And actually,
the head of the NBA Players Union, yeah.
Okay, so I was curious about this. So Michelle Roberts, head of the NBA Players Union, and she is fantastic. I got to see her at Sloan last year. We're going to talk Sloan in a bit. Was a fantastic talk. I was curious about this. Did she date Obama? Because Obama dated a Michelle Roberts. So anyway.
Interesting.
Okay.
He has a thing for Michelle's, I guess.
Makes sense. Okay, but anyway, so she was basically saying she was going to come at, I really hope I didn't just crash everything, Brian, but
no, you're
she
good.
said she was going to come at the one and done rule, right? Adam Silver a few years ago said he wanted to up the age limit, and that ain't happening. So even to your point, Adam Silver, one of the most popular NBA commissioners we've had. It's not, Stern wasn't a hard act to follow, but so he was coming out and saying he wanted to raise the age limit, and Michelle Roberts was like, fuck no was that happening.
Was that last year at Sloan, Dre, or 2 years ago? But it was recent, right?
Yeah, I saw her last year at Sloan, but I'm saying as soon as she got the job, she was just
But
like,
Silver
nope.
said that at Sloan, right?
That was 4 or 5 years ago. So,
Okay, a little bit longer.
So 4 or 5 years ago, he said that in a talk. And Michelle Roberts, when she got it, she's like, no, we're going to change that. The NBA after this was like, we're looking at revisiting the 18-year-old. And what ended up happening was they basically said the NBA can't do that without without the Players Association approving. And they're actually starting to put demands on how they would do that, because there were, I guess, insurance that, and this is very tertiary reading, because until it gets further, Brian and I can look into it more. But at least on Twitter, what I saw is basically the NBA is like, as long as there's insurance, we will do this, the 18 years. And the NBA Players Association is like, no, we're not going to agree to that. So we went from Adam Silver saying 2 years to the NBA saying, can we do 18 years with this? And the Players Association saying, no, if you're going to do 18 years, you do it even better. So like to your Overton window, 20 years ago, oh my God, these athletes getting paid, any athlete getting any money to play basketball is ruining the sport. It's shoving out Wooden, basically, right? That's probably who Nick Nolte is supposed to be playing. It's shoving out the great NBA or NCAA coaches that made this game great. It's ruining the sport. That's 20 years ago. 5 years ago, they can get paid, but they just have to pay their dues in college, to now where the NBA is even just like, just get him in. We don't want him injured.
Yeah. And, one thing on Blue Chips, that was an okay movie. Hoop Dreams is easily the best basketball movie of the 90s. Man, Hoop Dreams is so good.
I'm kind of messed up in how I'm willing to like read spoilers. So we're not allowed to talk about how the Warriors did tonight. Well, because Brian's got it DVR'd and doesn't want it spoiled. And so we're not going to talk about that. I'm someone who is okay with spoilers. I'll read spoilers to things and decide. So I've read Hoop Dreams. I've read the synopsis, and I just do not have it in me to watch it, because the spoiler about Hoop Dreams, for those that haven't seen this, 30-year-old documentary now, is you have this feel-good story of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan in Space Jam does this story, by the way, Brian. So we have the young kid really aspires to play basketball and goes to a good school and then goes to a good college and then gets recruited and goes to a good NBA team. That's the feel good story. And that's what, even Rudy goes to. This guy manages to make it to college and get a degree and play at a huge thing on the field. And after he's done, get a career as a motivational speaker. He's kind of a con man, but whatever. Those are the feel-good stories. The Hoop Dream story is you have some of the most amazing inner-city black players that want to go to the NBA, and they don't even make it to college because the system is so rough. So that's the spoiler alert, and that's the truth, is for most people, even wanting a college education out of being amazing at basketball doesn't happen in this really messed up system that, we're bashing how this system treats the elite. We are complaining about how the NCAA treats Zion Williamson, the top prospect out of high school, the top prospect for the NBA. We are saying, oh my God, they are mistreating this player. So if they're mistreating him, how do you think they treat the 10,001 person on a wait list of 75,000, right? Or 7,500, whatever, right? So yeah, it's a messed up system, and yeah, Hoop Dreams, you're right, it's probably a better movie, Brian. I've never been able to get myself to sit down and watch it because I know what it's going to say, and I'm not going to be happy about it.
It's so well made, and the characters, the kids and their family that they followed, and yeah, I think both of these guys were in Chicago, and like you said, the early 90s, late 80s, and it's incredible, so well made. A side comment that was really interesting to me about the Zion Williamson debate, easier said than done, is this comment from Sean King. I've talked about him a little bit before. He's a really big left-wing political activist, and whatever that's worth. But he has a theory. He replied to Darren Ravel, and Darren Ravel said LeVar Ball's basketball league unofficially died today, when the NBA announced the G League would be willing to sign players who are 18. Because that was the void the big baller league, LeVar's league, was trying to fill, right? Is the non-college 18-year-olds. And Sean King says he thinks LeVar's league might have helped push this decision. I don't think that's true. I think it's all about Zion. but it's an interesting idea.
So we might talk a little bit of my research that I did in grad school, which is forever ago at this point. But at CSU, they actually did have an artificial intelligence and machine learning department. That was one of the areas of focus for graduate studies. And our department chair was a big name in artificial intelligence for genetic algorithms. He was actually an anthropologist first. And one of the things he brought up that's fascinating is when you look at human progression and a new idea, a new breakthrough, it's really tempting to give credit to, Thomas Edison. You say Thomas Edison did this. And I'm choosing that name deliberately because many people know that Thomas Edison had a notorious rivalry with Nikola Tesla.
He's known as being very ruthless in business.
And did lots of messed up things to try and scrub his name from history and all of this. But that's the point. There were multiple creators at the same time coming up with similar ideas for technology. The Newton-Rassmann, I think I'm getting that name right, method of calculus is called that because despite the fact that Isaac Newton gets a lot of the praise for being the one who came up with modern calculus, there were other people in the world coming up with similar ideas at the same time. So basically, my professor's comment about this as an anthropologist is we kind of just hit these tipping points as a society where we're ready for an idea to break through. It's fascinating to the Overton window where you look at that, you go, man, gay marriage, for all of American history up until 2010 was political suicide to even acknowledge, to just even say, yeah, I'm cool with it.
Obama, according to the Republicans, the most worst liberal president of all time, farthest left socialist, he wouldn't even talk about it, Dre. Obama would not even talk about gay marriage.
Yeah, I believe going into his second term, the LGBTQ community was upset because they had supported him and said you were going to do more and you haven't been willing to come out. And then suddenly, boom, overnight, it's okay. The Overton window shifts and the political discourse doesn't become, is it okay for gay people to get married? It's how many civil rights should we support? All of them, by the way, but whatever. And we end up with the same idea with what I was talking there when you're saying the Ball League and then my professor's point, which is I don't think LeVar Ball was anything special with his league. I think he was indicative of we have reached a point in NBA progression, professional basketball progression, where someone is going to do this. And he might not be the only person with this idea. He might not be the first. We've also seen that in tech. It's a very popular point.
He happens to have two 18-year-old sons that need a job that aren't Lonzo, so...
That is definitely true. It matters. But I was going to say, like in tech, the first adopter principle, oftentimes the first person with an idea fails and everybody watches them fail and gets to learn what they did wrong and then make a better product. That's what happened with Facebook, by the way. That's what happened with Google. So I don't necessarily think LeVar, I think Sean King makes an astute observation, which is I think LeVar Ball basically is an indicative part that this idea of a professional league for young players in the United States, because it's that way around the world, right? We were talking about Luka Doncic a few shows ago, and he was pro at 15 and at MVP of his league at 18. So it's nothing new to like Europe, but the United States it might be. He's just indicative of it's that time now. And then now, because it's that time, we're now watching a rapid increase. So I'll be really interesting to see what happens to college hoops, professional hoops in the NBA in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah. So that was really interesting to me, and I hate to bring this up again, but this was kind of a black swan event, right? All this stuff happened within seconds. It was really interesting.
It was huge to have it be the two biggest names, most of them, right? I think UNC and Duke. I'm trying to think of more storied, like for
That's
Elon.
One of the most classic rivalries. Yeah.
UCLA maybe, but then what you're saying is rivalry, right? The North Carolina reason. So you have one of the biggest rivalries between two of the biggest schools on one of the biggest stages with the biggest prospect, with the president sitting there with an amazing image. Like, I think that's also an important thing, right? If Zion had run up and down the court a few times and tweaked his knee because the shoe was a little off balance and, sat down at halftime and the coach, goes to the locker room and comes back out, maybe runs a bit. And then at halftime, they pull him and say, as a precautionary measure, we're not going to play Zion. Even with the story being Zion injures himself in key game, that is not as amazing. So when you say black swan event, you're right. Like that image, that set of events was so perfect. And I think that's going to matter a lot. And so I think that I could be wrong, and I'm fine being wrong. I've talked about how easy it is to mess up predictions on surefire things. And so this is by no means a surefire thing, but I think my prediction is that's going to be a monumentous moment in college sports for years to come.
Yeah, and I love how you're talking about the visuals of it, because that's what happened, right? His shoe blew out, and what happened? He basically fell on his ass in pain, and that's just brutal, right? This guy we're talking about is built like Julius Peppers, is just in this weakest moment, and we're just like, this is not how it should be. You know, he's putting himself on the line and gets laid bare, and he's just not making any money.
All right. So apologies. I'm just going to have to shoehorn this in, and we'll go long like we always do, Brian. Yeah. But as mentioned, it's Sloan time, Brian. And I kind of last year was kind of my last Sloan, barring some major change, right? If I'm invited as a speaker, and even with that, like if I'm invited as a speaker and they offer me money and everything, then sure. But I won't be attending another Sloan on my own dime. Or even if a company offered me, I probably would be like, can I stay home? I'd rather hang out with my kid. Nothing personal. It's just what it's become and how big it's gotten and all that. So the MIT Sloan Analytics Conference is coming up. No one from the Boxscore Geeks, unless Patrick has changed his plans, is attending. But longtime friend of the show, Art Rondeau, is going. And so we've done some great research, and he's one of our favorite people because he is this, I think we said bridge at some point earlier on the show, but he is this interesting bridge where we have the nerdy analytics people like us that look at the numbers, and I've been very critical. I've said a majority of those people aren't even very good at what they do, but of those that are good, they come up with good numbers. But then you also have human beings. We were talking Dan Ariely, behavioral psychology, basically humans not behaving rationally. And so it's how do you get these numbers, ideas? How do you get teams to pay for Kenneth Faried, right? Like, how do you convince someone to do that? Because all of the illogical stuff that is ingrained in the system wants them not to do that. They want to go for an Andrew Wiggins. So Art Rondeau is a shooting coach that has seemed to be pretty good at doing that. And so we've loved his work. We've loved his research. He'll be at Sloan. We think NBA teams should talk to him because the way we really befriended him hugely is he came to me with some data on Allan Houston. In the 1999-2000 season, he was hired by Allan Houston to help make Allan Houston a star. And the reason he got this job is he had been working with Chris Dudley on the Knicks the year before. Chris Dudley was apparently a very nice, affable person that worked well with Art. The unfortunate part was after 1999, Chris Dudley basically just had injuries and his career ended. So it's a shame because essentially the person that liked working with Art, Chris Dudley, ended up getting injured and not helping. Allan Houston ended up working with Art Rondeau, and there's a lot of drama and fun stuff. I really hope that more of this comes out because I know Art said he's going to blog more about it. But essentially, he had a contentious relationship with Allan Houston that ended up in what I consider one of the most amazing case studies because he worked with Allan Houston, but he worked with Allan Houston 30 games of the season and didn't work with him 52 games of the season. Normally, if you had a coach, any type of coach like Budenholzer versus Jason Kidd, we don't get to have Jason Kidd coach 20 games and Budenholzer coach 20 games, and they use the exact same lineups against the exact same competition, and we say, who's a better coach, right? We have no idea the change between Jason Kidd and Budenholzer, but with Art Rondeau, we have one season, 2 data sets. We get to look at how Allan Houston performed with Art and how Allan Houston performed without.
Can I jump in with a quick question, Dre? The 30 games were also non-continuous, right? He got access off and on throughout the season.
Yes, essentially, yeah. Art Rondeau was hired to work the whole season, and Allan would kind of blow him off and then call him back and blow him off. And so, yeah, we get this amazing set of data in the fact that it's a non-continuous set of data that is, home and away, differing levels of competition, all sorts of stuff. So we get these 2 data sets of with Art, without, and the data basically says Art not only transformed Allan into the best he had been in that season, but the best he'd been in his career. The 2 data sets were so vastly different. To me, it's still one of the most shocking stories because we love these stories. As an example, help me with the name, but the Golden State Warriors video editor.
Yeah. So Nick Uren, who famously proposed to Steve Kerr, let's start Draymond Green at center and go super small in the finals.
Which we would basically say Draymond Green is an above average player. You really can't mess up your starting 5, right? If you've got Steph Curry and, Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, Harrison Barnes back when he was good, you really can't mess up this starting 5. But he suggests this and it works out and he gets all this credit. At the at MIT Sloan, they gave an Alpha Award to Coach Carlisle, and I believe I'm dropping his name, but he worked for 82 games. He made the site 82 games for suggesting they start JJ Barea in Game 3 of the NBA Finals. So we have these small coaching decisions that we can point to intelligently and say, at best, that result is noise. You have no way to statistically prove that decision was the right one. You are doing outcome-based rewards, right? We are saying because you won a title, because you won the finals, in both cases actually, we are going to say what a genius move by Nick Urin. What a genius move by, I think it's Roland of 82 games. Another example with the Mavericks, Tony Robbins told them, he said, don't pack your bag.
Tony Robbins, the inspirational speaker?
Tony Robbins, the inspirational speaker, to the Mavericks, told them when they ended up beating the Miami Heat. He said, "Don't pack your bags because if you pack your bags, you're going to think about coming home for Game 7. You're going to win on the road. So don't pack your bags." And they did. Now, funny note, what happens if he tells them not to pack their bags? They lose a close Game 6. They don't have their clothes, and then they lose Game 7. We'd be going, man, the Mavericks were really fucking stupid to listen to Tony Robbins. They weren't prepared for Game 7. And a funny note to the Dallas Mavericks, too, they listened to on-off data as well, and they benched their center, I believe, is Eric Dampier in 2006, I think, 2006 or 2007, when they lost your Golden State Warriors in the first round of the playoffs, Brian. So there are these small decisions that are just noise. So in this case, Art approached us with a data set that was actually large enough to be statistically significant, and it was remarkable. And then as we note, I wrote an article about it called the Allan Houston Case Study. It was wildly important because he was good enough. Allan Houston was good enough to essentially help Jeff Van Gundy be coach of the All-Star game and, also help this team into the playoffs. So this was a huge monumentous study. So it's how we became good friends with Art Rondeau. And to our point, when we're talking these other people that have gotten famous names for themselves in analytics, we're like, how does this guy not have a job in a front office? So he's going out to Sloan. We want to showcase some of his work so it's readily available. We're going to be doing that this week. So I wanted to recap that story and, tell it from my perspective, which was I had someone come up to me with some data and say, I want you to look at this data. And I even told him before I looked at it, I said, look, it's probably just going to be noise because I'm used to this shit, right? I'm used to people saying, I have this amazing story. I love American Numbers, Arturo on Twitter. But he just tweeted out, in 300 some odd games of DeMarcus Cousins playing with the Warriors, they're playing like a 500 level team. And I haven't responded yet, but I'm like, that's 6 games,
Yeah.
A good team can go on a 6-game losing streak. We've seen it before. Like both the Warriors when they first got Kevin Durant, and I think the Miami Heat and Cleveland Cavaliers. I think both teams when they first got LeBron James were like a little weaker in the first 15 games, and people were like, "Oh my God, the sky's on fire!" It's like that's just small sample size. It can happen. So that was what I was prepared to say, and when I looked at the data, I was amazed at how well it did. And then another nice byproduct I'm going to write up about this is Art helped me with some fun metrics. So one we've released before, we've called it the game changer metric. And so the way it works is you can take the wins produced formula, translate it to points over par is what we called it. This is what Arturo came up with. And the point being, that's how much margin that player's performance helped you with. Anybody familiar with the Vegas line should be helpful with this, right? Well, guy plays good enough. As an example, James Harden right now is playing at like a plus 5.8 points over par per 48 player, which essentially means he's on an average team against an average team in a neutral field. James Harden is a plus 6 edge. If you were betting on that game, the betting makers would set that line at plus 6, right? That's what that can do. So what you can do is you can look at a player's performance. You can look at how much the team won the game by. And if their points over par exceeds the amount they won by or lost by, they were a game changer. They impacted the game. And Allan Houston is great because he's a player that's been on both sides of the coin. He has played so bad that if you replaced Allan Houston with an average player, they would have won the game. And under Art's tutelage, he's been so good that if you replaced him with an average player, they would have lost the game. So that's one metric we came up with. It's called the game changer. And I believe, I'll just say this, I'll phrase it this way to you, Brian, because we talked a little bit about Dean Oliver. We might talk a little Dean Oliver. To that exact same point. So Dean Oliver, you mentioned to me on Twitter, came out about Kyrie Irving and says, wow, it's really weird with on-off statistics. The Celtics are playing better without Kyrie Irving than with. And I might have some points on that to end the show off with Brian. But like, again, sample size and bullshit, but whatever. Dean Oliver came up with a concept called a threshold win, which is very similar. It's using net rating, which is the win shares metric with a similar point, to look at the same idea. Basically, if a player's net rating exceeds how much they won or lost by, he calls it a threshold win. The way I'll phrase it, Brian, is I wrote about game changers in the Allan Houston case study and gave that to Art. Art has distributed that to many people, including Dean Oliver, and I know Dean Oliver has read that paper multiple times because he had questions for Art about the statistical significance. So I had not seen Dean Oliver mention the idea of a threshold win anywhere on Twitter or in his writing. And if I'm wrong, because I know he was also on like old message boards. I think some of the message boards, like there was a ABPR message board, like a Sonics one that was lost. We've mentioned we're sad. Ian Levy's blog Hickory High just went down. There are lots of old NBA blogs that because someone didn't re-up their server are gone. So I can't say definitively, but as far as I know, I had not seen Dean Oliver say anything about threshold wins until after he had read my paper. But Dean Oliver has now come up with a similar idea called a threshold win. So Art and I came up with a concept called a game changer. So I love this out of Art's research to do that. And I have another one that I'll be releasing a post on this week, Brian. I call it the Rondeau ratio. So the idea being if you take a player's the top third of their games, and compare it to the rest, how balanced is that ratio, right? How good is a player's performance in their top third games? So about 25 to 30 games in an 82 game regular season. How does that compare? And the reason I came up with this idea is based on Allan Houston, because we have 30 games of Allan Houston under Art Rondeau, and that performance is so wildly different than the rest of his games that's just interesting. And it also gets onto players like for this week's top 10 box scores of the week, or top 5 actually, Klay Thompson is still a front runner on the top 5 list. He's way behind Giannis Antetokounmpo for front of the list for the year because I'm doing an MVP voting scheme. But he's on it because he's had some career-defining games, right? This season, he has the all-time NBA record for made threes in a game. But a majority of his games are below average. So if you cherry-pick Klay Thompson's best games, how lopsided does that look versus a player like James Harden, who just routinely puts up good games? And the reason I came up with this idea for Allan Houston is if you cherry-picked Allan Houston's best games and got a ratio, it almost looks identical to how he did under Art. And then this gives you a very fun way of examining players as to how balanced of a player they are. If their Rondeau ratio, the Art Rondeau, so not Rajon Rondo, but if the Art Rondeau ratio is wildly off balance, it means that they can be a tremendously talented player that just is not very consistent.
That's really interesting. When you first went into that, I was a little skeptical because I remember we would talk about a few years ago how Klay Thompson was considered to be an inconsistent player, and we would say, who cares about that? But as you talked about it more, I'm starting to think, here's the most useful part about this stat, and it would be a way to try to bridge the gap between real production and perception of production. And what I mean by that is someone with a really, I guess it would be a really high Rondeau ratio in that they produce all their stats in a few number of games, like Klay Thompson potentially. We'll see if he ends up being one of those players. Maybe that's something that leads them to be an overrated player, and you may want to, if you're an NBA executive, maybe use that to your advantage when you're valuing players.
Interesting. And I mean, this for the record did happen with Allan Houston. Allan Houston did make the All-Star game. And if you break down Allan Houston's performance in that season, if you remove Art Rondeau, and we did this in the article we wrote about it called the Allan Houston Case Study, he's a bad player. So it's I think you're right, where it's important for an NBA executive to not get too psyched. And sometimes this happens early in the NBA season. We do this, right, Brian, where we have some players that are leading the league in wins produced, and we go, they had 2 really amazing games. I don't really believe that, Joe Ingles is going to be MVP of the league just because he shot 6 for 9 from 3 in the first game of the NBA season. It's going to calm down. And so I think the Rondeau ratio is important to that point too, where you go, I think this player is really good. And if they have a high Rondeau ratio, can explain it. You go, oh yeah, Klay Thompson, I know we bash Klay Thompson routinely and use the phrase bash routinely about it, but it's because of stuff like that. It's because he has, behind Steph Curry, the most 10 made 3 games in NBA history. It's because he puts up those games. But you have to ask yourself, is he putting those up consistently enough for me to want to pay him max contract? And in both Allan Houston and now Klay Thompson's case, the answer is no.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we've ever called this, the Mark Cuban effect or something like that, but we've talked about this before. And specifically, we talked about this recently, actually. Mark Cuban came to the Wages of Wins blog message boards and argued with us about Chris Kaman. And what we credit Cuban for the most, I would say, is being the first owner to spend a lot of money on things outside the game, right? Getting good flights, getting good food and training for his players, and really setting things. And so, basically circumventing the salary cap almost by spending money on things that weren't related to the salary cap. So we gave him all kinds of credit for that. But then we think he goes too into that sometimes, right? Saying, well, our climate and culture is so good that we could turn Chris Kaman, traditionally a very poor player, into a good one. So using this ratio, I think that's a good way to talk yourself out of doing things like that.
Well, I mean, when we were talking Duke, and then one of our favorites around here is the sunk cost fallacy. But with Duke, it's like when you invest in something, you tend to give yourself, you tend to overrate it, and that's just a human thing. And so I think you're right. The key behind something like the Rondeau ratio is you want a tool that can help keep you in line. And as humans, it's funny, we didn't really get into the artificial intelligence or anything about Sloan because you were saying some of that, Brian. We'll maybe
next
talk more.
Week, yeah.
Because I have some background knowledge and stuff that I did artificial intelligence and machine learning for my grad school stuff as well. And I've said I'm kind of skeptical as to how well that's going to go over in the sports community for the same reason I've had about analytics forever, being if someone that's good at machine learning or artificial intelligence and all this other stuff, you can make so much money outside of the NBA doing it compared to the NBA. The NBA just doesn't pay for it. And we've seen this, right? Like if you don't give an incentive to a player to do something, they're not going to do it. And it's the exact same with professionals working for NBA teams. But when you look at things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, one of the possible benefits of them is that we can remove areas of bias that humans have if used properly. I know Ocasio-Cortez was pointing out that algorithms can be biased and flawed and racist because they're just like everything else. Whatever input you feed them, garbage in, garbage out, can happen. So for machine learning, it's going to take a lot to make sure we use it correctly, but we can do a lot to curb areas of bias and areas where we're not as humans good at things. And I think professional sports is that because, you've seen how high I've already gotten on Luka Doncic. I think you're being very useful in that you are curbing my enthusiasm because I'm like all in. After each season, I'm like,
well,
oh my God.
Everyone else, to be honest, I feel like I'm out on an island right now, even though I still really like him.
Yeah, I'm just saying he's the most impressive 19-year-old we've ever seen. We have not seen this before in the NBA, and you know how easily I fall for something novel.
Even LeBron and Kevin Durant took a couple years.
Yeah, it took them a while because they didn't have 4 seasons of playing professional ball in Europe first, and I think they would have, if LeBron James, we can ask after watching Luka Doncic for a couple of years, we might say, geez, the NBA really missed out on 2 or 3 more amazing seasons of LeBron James, what they could have had. But I get really high on Luka Doncic, and it's not hard to just say, hey, take a step back. Let's be a little more rational about this. Even if we're updating our Bayesian priors to say he's going to be amazing, we can still start slowing that trend down a little, right? We just temper it a little, use other tools. And I think you're right. That's an important place to go because even if you use a smart money ball technique to do something, if you don't have checks and balances to ensure that you're still monitoring it correctly, you're still going to fall prey to the exact same bias that you were trying to overcome by using that tool in the first place.
Yeah, boy, and I'm just looking at these Luka Doncic numbers. I think you're going to be right more than ever. So it's interesting his position is going to point guard now. I haven't been following this. I don't know if he is starting at point guard, but anyway, we love Luka Doncic.
Yeah, he is a good player. Okay, well that was a ton, Brian. I think we did the classic hour and a half. We've been doing a little longer, maybe. So I'll give you anything to end on, and then I'll just do the outro.
No, I don't have too much, unless we want to address Dean Oliver's tweet directly, the Kyrie Irving stuff. But I guess you did already earlier, right? Kyrie Irving's missed 13 games. Dean Oliver says it's still 1,000 possessions is enough sample size, but I think we're a little suspicious of that. So I have no shout-outs either. So.
Yeah, all I'll say on stuff like on-off is that even what Dean Oliver's doing here, if you want to do the research for it, there's a great chapter in a Richard Feynman book where he comes up with the term cargo cult scientists. And in that, he talks about the right way to do experiments and how many people don't control for all the variables. And that actually applies here, where it's going, if you want to do this research, there are things you have to control for, things you have to look at. And I just don't believe that you have. And even if you do start doing that, you know, it might be 1,000 possessions on the aggregate, but as soon as you start controlling for home, away, who else, how different the rosters are, because Kyrie on versus Kyrie off, the Celtics have not been the bastion of health this season. So it's possible that Kyrie was off, but so was Al Horford, or so was Jason Tatum, or so was Terry Rozier. Like,
I like that theory. That's probably what it is, huh?
I'm just saying, he's saying 1,000 possessions is enough, and this is very Groundhog's Day-ish, because we had a Kevin Pelton argument in the actually Boxscore Geeks, where he was trying to do some stuff with this about, I think, Nikola Jokic and Mason Plumlee, and I went and looked at the numbers, and as soon as I tore it apart a little, I was like, you cannot tell me that it is Mason Plumlee specifically. I think it was Mason Plumlee. It might have been another player, because I was like, this guy plays with Danilo Gallinari and Chandler, and Danilo Gallinari and Will Barton, and as soon as I start doing that, I can't tell you for sure if it was Chandler or Gallinari or Plumlee, and that means that the answer is we don't know. And I'm saying, he might say there's 1,000 possessions, and I'm saying it might just take 2 passes to go, there are enough other variables in here that none of them have a statistically significant enough sample size. And that is one of my takes on analytics. I wish more people would just say we don't know, or that's interesting. By him saying it's not a small sample size, 1,000 possessions, he's trying to say it means something. And I'm going to say I haven't looked into it myself, but I would, as a betting man, I would say I would bet not.
Shout out to Dean Majors, who replied to Dean Oliver with a similar tweet saying, wouldn't it just be explained by more starter minutes mixed into the stat when he doesn't play at all? Kyrie's on is starters minutes. Kyrie's off is mostly bench minutes. So That's an interesting idea. And Dean Oliver says, I don't have enough time to look at that. So
fuck that noise. So what I'll say, and I am this guy on Twitter, Brian, thanks, we'll go even longer, but yeah, you know, I've been this guy on Twitter, I say inflammatory things from time to time, but it's like, if you're going to come out swinging and then back down from, you know, I'm fine backing down from stupid.
Generally good idea, but does not have enough time.
Massive eye roll to you, Dean Oliver. You're not going to hear this stuff, so it doesn't matter. All right, well, anyway, that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me most places, including chess.com as Nerd Numbers. I've been pretty consistently above 1,500, so come challenge me, although I normally just play tournaments. So come play 3-0 Swiss and 5-0 Swiss if you want to see me on chess.com. And producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. And then we are also on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. We go live every week, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers, most Mondays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can catch recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. Thanks so much. Hope your team wins. And if you feel like it, go spoil the Warriors games for Brian if you watch this live. Just go on Twitter, spoil it right now. Talk to you later.